You can also face transitions in your career. You can face transitions when you move geography. You can face it when you have a new baby, when you have an empty nest, when your relationship status changes. All of these different types of life events are transitions, and everybody has issues with them. No one likes change, myself included. No one likes change, and it's hard to figure out how to get from point A to point B. And we often don't know how to do it, and we get in our own way. And friends and family are not often able to provide the level of support that you might really need given a certain difficulty level.
Welcome to your podcast, Successful Quitters by Sara Nunez. Okay, would you rather play tennis or go bowling?
Play tennis, although I really am not a tennis player.
Would you rather have tea or a glass of wine?
Oh, glass of wine, absolutely.
Would you rather dress up for a romantic dinner at a fancy restaurant or stay in your PJs and watch a movie at home?
Dress up and go to a fancy restaurant for a romantic dinner, hands down.
I love that. All righty. Welcome, guys, once again to another episode of Successful Quitters, a show that explores the different things that people have had to quit in order to become successful in their arena. My name is Sara Nunez, and I will be your host. Today, I have someone very, very special. She is an experienced and very well-rounded woman in different industries, published author for Medium.com, and she is You Magazine. She has been a project manager. She has had plenty of experience in advertising agencies. She is an exhibiting painter and digital designer. I love that. And she does something very powerful and empowering nowadays. She is a life transition coach. Welcome, Ellen Rothstein.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm so happy to be here and talk to your viewers and share my story. I'm very excited to be doing this.
I'm very excited to have you here and share your story. Ellen, tell us, take us back to the beginning of all of this. Tell us a little bit about Ellen at 5 years old.
Oh,
what was life like? Where did you live? What was it like back then?
I grew up in Los Angeles. My father was a doctor. My mother was an artist. And we lived in a modern house in a canyon. It was a beautiful place to grow up. At 5, all I wanted to do was dance around. We have lots of old movies of me dancing. I did not become a dancer. But the part of me that loved to dance is what I have probably spent a lot of decades getting back to. That uninhibited, unself-conscious, pure joy of dancing around. That little girl, like many little girls, goes through a lot of changes and evolutions and can be a little disconnected to the adult woman.
Yeah, and so you lived in Los Angeles, which is where you live nowadays. You actually live in San Francisco. I apologize. So very close to Los Angeles. A couple of hours, but we could say kind of close. Same time.
I lived there with my parents and my younger sister until I was 17. Parts of my childhood, I'd say, were wonderful. Other parts were challenging. My mother went back to school when I was 6. She went to UCLA to finish her undergraduate education, and then she became a very active feminist artist, and she got her MFA at CalArts when I was in high school. But she also was drinking, and that was made for a challenging childhood at times. It was not all the time by any means, but it was definitely challenging. So when I was 17, I was glad to go to college.
At 17. But let's just, so we have a little more background information. How do you think this situation of your mother impacted you? Do you think it had any impact on the decisions that you make nowadays?
Absolutely. I discovered that I couldn't really count on her when I was a young teenager to be there for me in a way that I really needed.
Mm,
Fortunately, I take after my dad, and we are much more grounded and practical and less volatile than my mother. So I thought, okay, I'm going to have to do this myself, and I'm going to have to rely on other people. I'm going to have to identify and then rely on some other people that can help guide me through things that are hard. It wasn't quite that articulated at the time, but I sensed that, okay, she's not really going to be there in a way that I need. So I have to find a workaround.
did you have to also be the older sister that had to protect the younger sister, or is she too far
No,
from
she's
you?
only 2 years younger.
Oh,
And
she's only
she
two.
was much closer to my mother in probably chemical makeup and emotional makeup. So there wasn't really anything I needed to do. My sister and I are very close to this day, but
Yeah,
we are also different in that way. So it never occurred to me about protecting her as much as we were in this together, whatever this may be.
yeah. Is there, when at that age or even closer to high school maybe, was there anything that you thought, this is what I want to be when I grow up? Maybe, like you said, maybe anything with dancing or no?
Not dancing. At that time, I had no clue. But later, I did take after my mother in terms of art. She was very influential and formative, and she took us to a lot of museums. And I
Mm.
learned a lot about the art scenes, the art movement, the different movements in history. So when I started UC Berkeley, I took a lot of art history and a lot of practice of art. And in the end, I graduated with a degree in the practice of art. But I didn't
Was
realize that until I was out of the house.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's crazy how big of an impact parents have because there was a, like you said, a little bit of a negative thing, but also you're so artistic because I've seen some of I saw your website and the things that you actually create digitally, and it's beautiful. So it's so nice that you took after your mother when it comes to artistic things.
Thank
Good
you.
for you, for sure. And
I
then you went, uh-huh, go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, I appreciate that I did get that from her.
Yeah, I think throughout the years, especially nowadays, it wasn't as strong before, but nowadays being artistic is very helpful for any career.
It
So
is.
that definitely strengthens anything that you do. And then you finished college with an art degree, but then you went into a more serious side of the advertisement industry, correct?
Well, to backtrack a little bit, I've always loved France, and I had the great opportunity to go to France a lot, and including my junior year of college. So I had to make a big decision. Did I want to pursue French and comparative literature, or did I want to pursue art? So I had quite a crisis my third year when I was in France and decided, okay, I'm here, I love it, but it's art that I want to do. So when I came back to finish college, I focused exclusively at that point on pursuing art. And I did have gallery representation by the time I graduated college. And I had
Wow.
art consultants selling my pieces. And for a while there, it was very satisfying and productive. And then later, it became clear that I didn't know if I was going to sell a painting in 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years. And that was very financially stressful. That was really, really hard. And so at this point, I had just gotten married and we were not making it financially. And
Was your husband an artist as well?
he had a degree from art, but he was in the wine business
Ah, okay.
and also doesn't pay that well. And
Yeah.
I've been working part time in an art supply store, but it just wasn't working. And so I had to, quote, quit being an artist full time. And that was a big decision. At this point, I had come to an impasse with my gallery because they wanted me to do more than just paint. They wanted me to pick up people at the airport, entertain them. And I was just like, hold on, time out. I'm the painter here. You're supposed to do all that. You're taking 50% of the sales. That's your job.
Yeah.
And so we ended up parting ways. And then that sort of became clear that it was time to figure out a way to do something else. And so I ended up working for my best friend's husband, who ran a law firm. I worked as a receptionist and I hated it. I got very good at it, but I hated it. And after a while, I thought, okay, this is soul killing. I'm not ever going to be a lawyer. I'm not even going to be a paralegal. So, how can I get back to something that is more who I am? So I enrolled in the UC Berkeley extension program for interior design and architecture, mostly design. And I took a lot of classes. And every time I finished one, they added another requirement. And this was going on and on. And then I had my first child. And I stayed home with him for a year. And then we were broke. And I would have loved to stay home with him longer. But as I say, we were broke. So I got another job as a receptionist, but this time in an architecture firm, thinking naively that, oh, I can use what I've been studying. Well, I stayed too long, had another baby, and then it became clear this was a complete dead end. So I eventually ended up working for an advertising agency because my best friend at the architecture firm had left and she got hired in advertising. And she said, oh, come here. You'll get to use your creativity. It'll be so much better. So I did that. And I worked first part-time and then eventually grew into full-time at quite a few different agencies. And I did that for quite a while. But I did it on the account management side, not the creative side. I managed the clients and the internal teams, but the art part was so removed from me being an artist. It was very much about producing digital work that was exclusively used to promote products. It was not going to be my creative outlet. But I discovered there was a whole nother side of me that was previously untapped. And that was the people part. And I did that for a lot of years, getting laid off periodically because in the nature of the advertising business, when you get new accounts, you hire people. When you lose them, you fire people. So there was a lot of ups and downs about that. Eventually, I ended up moving more into the digital realm and worked for a digital media company for quite a while. And please interrupt me if you've got questions.
No. You're good. You're good. I have plenty of questions for later.
So I kept doing that. And that's where I became a project manager in addition to doing the account management part. And then in early 2019, I got laid off along with a lot of other people. The company was not doing well. Except at that point, I'd become an older woman living in San Francisco, which is a young tech town. I'd been living in San Francisco for a long time, but the part that changed was I was an older woman, not a good fit. And I tried to get hired and I would get really close and then I wouldn't get the job. And it became like fitting a round peg in a square hole or vice versa. And the more I thought about doing this, the more I thought, I don't even want to do this. But I thought I had to have a full-time job with benefits. I had 2 sons to raise. My husband was still in the wine business. And I had been working with a life coach specifically on some career issues, which I can get into later.
Let me ask you this, because I don't know if it's just me, and I had heard the word life coach or the words life coach before. I'm from Peru, so I don't know if being Latin has anything to do with that, but even being here for these many years, I had never really met many people, or I've never heard anyone saying, hey, I'm working with someone that's helping me transition from one part of my life to the other. So no coaching, right, for that transition. is this very, has it become more popular now? Is it like than when you started, when
Absolutely.
you were getting coached? How did
Also,
you find out about this coach first?
well, let me answer all of those questions. You are absolutely right. I've discovered by talking to friends in France, it's not as globally a thing the way it is in the United States. The United States is much more common to have heard of life coaching. It's not all over the world by any means. I found out about it because when I was working at the digital media agency, I was struggling. I thought I was going to get laid off, and actually I did, and they rehired me later. But I was struggling with, what am I going to do with myself? What do I want to be when I grow up? And so I was introduced by a colleague to a woman who was doing life coaching. So she
Mm,
and I worked together on the phone. We met a few times in person, but we worked together on the phone for quite a few years to try to identify what I was struggling with, which again I can get to later after I finish the chronology of all this. But during the course of working with her, she had said, I think you have a knack for this. I think you'd be really good as a life coach. So I took a few classes, dipped my toe in the water, and thought, yeah, I like this. I do have an affinity for it, but I need a full time job. So then, fast forward to when I got laid off and discovered I couldn't get a full time job anymore. Then I had to really think about, okay, timeout, big change. What do you really want to do? What are you good at in these positions? And I realized it was the people part. When I was the liaison between the upper management and the sales team and the creative side and the clients, that's when I thrived. It was bringing all the people together. And I thought, okay,
mm,
there's really something in this. But that meant quitting the idea of having a full time job and quitting getting rehired at another agency or another company doing either project management or account management or whatever I thought I was going to be doing for all of my career years. And that was a huge shift. Now, also around this time, COVID hit. So everybody was home, and suddenly it wasn't quite
oh
so
no.
embarrassing to be home. But it enabled me to do some big thinking about what do I really care about and what makes me happy. And what makes me happy is what I'm good at, not the dancing, unfortunately. What I'm good at is working with people. And so I enrolled in a full time um, life coach certification program. And in this program, you had to pick an area of expertise. And at that time, I picked retirement because, first of all, it was very uncommon, but mainly I was encountering colleagues and people I knew that were facing retirement and really struggling. And I thought, I think I can help here. My father, having been a doctor, noticed that his patients, when they hit retirement, if they had no plans, they physically and emotionally deteriorated very quickly. But those
Mm,
patients that had plans thrived. And that stayed with me. I thought, there's something here to work with. So I started focusing on retirement, but gradually I realized, wait a minute, retirement is only one type of transition. You can also face transitions in your career. You can face transitions when you move geography. You can face it when you have a new baby, when you have an empty nest, when your relationship status changes. All of these different types of life events are transitions, and everybody has issues with them. No one likes change, myself included. No one likes change, and it's hard to figure out how to get from point A to point B. And we often don't know how to do it, and we get in our own way. And
yeah.
friends and family are not often able to provide the level of support that you might really need given a certain difficulty level. So that's how I ended up going into life coaching, and that's how I ended up specifically becoming a life transition coach.
So now that you're a life transition coach, you started spreading a little bit more outside of just retirement, correct? And Is there one type of transition that you would say might be a little more challenging than others that you have dealt with?
I think it really depends on the person. Some people are better equipped and more resilient to get through any kind of transition. Other people struggle at something that could be seemingly easy for someone else. So I don't think it's about the transition as much as it is about how that person is equipped to handle a transition.
I see. Because you know what came to mind? Well, everyone goes through transitions, but have you ever dealt with people that come back from war, veterans?
I came close. I had someone that reached out to me that was leading a peacekeeping troop in Syria. And he was about to retire in about 3 months, and he was going to come back to the States. And he, I thought, was going to be a potential client for dealing with that exact transition. And he reached out to me because he recognized that he was going to have to start this process. Ultimately, we did not end up working together, but I learned a little bit about what his life was like.
Yeah, definitely. That has to be a strong transition. And what I think of is also, how does this go with people's blueprint? For example, if I want to be a dancer, now that we've been talking about dancing so much, if I want to be a dancer and I think that that's my path, and all of a sudden something happens to where I can't use one of my legs or anything like that, then there's a forced transition because this is definitely unexpected. So through your coaching, do we work on changing the blueprint, what we think our life should have been?
We look for what we can still pull out of that original blueprint and how we can create a new blueprint that incorporates what's important to that person. So, for this person, for example, who was no longer able to be a dancer, we could explore all other aspects of dance, other involvement areas. We could talk about working with dance schools or organizations or nonprofits or teaching, or there's probably any number of related areas that to to related areas to dance that are not strictly being the dancer. And
Yeah,
so
to
we
make
could tease out what those possibilities are, come up with a very structured, actionable plan to do research. And that person would also be trying on ideas to see what is the most satisfying. And it could be that that person decides it's too painful to have it that related to dance because all he or she really wanted to do was be the dancer. But there is something in the idea of working in a school with young students, and then maybe that evolves into a different direction completely. But it started with the idea of being a dancer.
yeah, nice. Yeah, definitely feeling involved within the same area. That sounds like it would help a lot. And how do you, if you're not searching for a coach and you don't feel ready to hire a coach just yet, how can you help yourself take maybe the half step to prepare for a life change?
Well, first of all, be patient with yourself. There are known steps of change. There's a great study and the whole methodology by Prochaska, which outlines the stages of change. The person you're describing is in the pre contemplation stage. They're just trying on the ideas and starting to think about it. And this could take as long as it needs to take. So that's why I say be patient. You're not going to do anything that's going to work until you're ready. So give yourself some time to think about it. Don't put pressure on yourself. But nonetheless, jot down ideas that occur. If something catches your interest, pursue it. You want to do a little research online, in person, whatever, in that area, do it in a way that makes you feel happy, not pressured.
Yeah. And what is it like to reach out to a life transition coach? What are the steps that one goes through once we reach out to someone like yourself?
Well, it's pretty easy. You just email me. And then we set up an initial intake.
Interview.
It's typically done by Zoom. If they're local, it could be in person, or if they don't want to Zoom, it could always be on the phone. And at that point, I ask them a lot of questions to try to understand where they are currently, what is the transition they are trying to or expecting to go through. And we just start to identify what's important to them. What I really find is that we don't often spend enough time thinking about what are our values. And I created a value tool so they can work with that tool if they find it helpful. But certainly it's about thinking about what do they really care about. And if your values are misaligned, you could end up in a career situation, for example, that is not ultimately satisfying. For example, if you go to law school and you come out, well, let's back up a second. If you really love the arts, but you got parental pressure to earn a living, and so you end up going to law school. It's not your passion, but it's something you felt like you had to do. And then you have to pick an area of law to practice. If you go into corporate law, for example, or some type of law that is very far away from where you started, you might find that your values are misaligned. However, say you become a lawyer for the arts. You might find a way to support the arts, which is aligning with your values because you really believe in the arts. So there may be a way to end up with something very satisfying if you're clear what your values are. So I encourage people to think about it, and we work together to really identify those values.
Yeah. And that was my following question is how strong is in these cases the opinion of, obviously it varies from case to case, but from your experience, what the average, how strong is it the opinion of others when you're working through these transitions with people?
It's very important, but one has to also, in the end, rely on oneself.
Yeah.
The opinion, for example, the opinion of a parent is very deeply seated, and we want our parents' approval. But it is possible to become an independent, separated adult and have confidence in yourself. And therefore, if you don't get the approval, while it still may hurt, you can find a way to be okay. It's a little trickier if, say, it's your spouse and your spouse doesn't approve of you wanting to quit your job and travel around to India for a year. There are ramifications. You are involving other people, and their opinion does matter a little bit more than the fact that your parents think you should be a lawyer and not go into the arts. So that is something that has to be more carefully navigated. But again, in the end, you do have to be true to yourself and find a way to make your situation work.
Absolutely. And does it ever happen that couples transition together?
Yes, it can happen. I can't think of any specific example. I think it also happens they may transition at different rates and in different ways, but they may weather the entire transition ultimately together.
Yeah. And does it occur as well that when people are trying to retire, that you have to deal with the 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 daughter or the son in order to kind of see where this transition coaching will take them, or is it usually the person that's doing the transition, the one that's going to deal with you?
It's the one that's going to deal with me. But I'm not
Yeah.
opposed to talking to spouses or children as well. That
Yeah.
situation hasn't come up.
What does this do for you nowadays? since you have had all this expertise in so many areas, but then there's this artistic place. How does this give you, that good feeling artistically?
Well, first I'm going to answer that and in a more non-artistic way. Before I became a coach, and this is one of the reasons why I ended up doing this, is I had been talking to a friend of mine, and she had taken an early retirement package from a large corporation. And she wasn't that old, and she felt like, oh, I need to get a new full-time job. And she really didn't want to. She had worked herself so hard in all those previous years, raising two children, husband with his own career and very busy. And she was just exhausted. But she felt like she had to get another full-time job. So we talked about it and we worked it through. And I didn't give her permission. She finally gave herself permission not to get a full-time job and to come up with something else to do that could bring some income in, but she didn't have to get a full-time job because of the package she took. So we were able to sort of unpack her issues. And she ended up so happy and so grateful. She said multiple times, thank you so much. I could not have done this without you. I am so much happier than I thought I would be. And that feeling was so
Mm,
satisfying for me. There was no gain in it for me. I didn't care what she did. But the fact that I helped her navigate this and end up in a place that she was so happy to be at, that was deeply satisfying. And I thought, I want to do that again. I like this feeling. So from that standpoint, the non-artistic standpoint, it's very satisfying. The
mm,
artistic part is a little harder to articulate. I still do the digital designs on my own. I do have a store it's a Shopify store called ellenbrodydesigns.com. But I do try to incorporate my love of color, hence
mm.
my shirt and my um, into my regular daily life. I just
Mm,
make sure I don't have to do anything. It's just something that is so important to me. My love of color and pattern, and I feed that as best I can. Tomorrow I'm going to the museum. I travel. I just have this appreciation for my own creativity and I'm no longer with the gallery. I'm not making art in order to sell it. I'm doing it for the satisfaction of the process. And
yeah,
I've just incorporated all of that into my daily life.
absolutely. That sounds perfect. That sounds like the perfect way to do this too. And I think that maybe it is a thing where when you're an artist, you're a little softer. So I think you get twice the amount of happiness once you see someone thrive, once you see someone be happy with your help, your support. That's so much more giving to you than any money can give you.
Sure.
Um, and what do you think of, we're in LA, I'm in LA, and there are so many artists that come to this place specifically, leaving everything behind with that Hollywood dream and, starting over and I'm gonna do whatever it takes. And they find themselves at the same place where you found yourself at one point and said, how am I gonna survive selling this art? What do you suggest that these people keep in mind?
Two things. And it varies, obviously, by everybody's unique situation. I don't mean to overgeneralize at all. But the first thing I would say is everything you do is going to be competitive. You cannot let that make you crazy. There's always going to be other people doing it more, better, faster, sooner, more, whatever. You have to block it out. If you want to be doing something artistic or anything really that makes you happy, just do it. Ignore the rest of the world. That said, the other thing I would say is you may have to get creative about how you structure your life because you have to pay your rent. You have to be able to survive. And if you've gone to 10,000 auditions and never gotten a job and you're living on welfare, it's time to take a step back and find some other way to structure your life. It doesn't mean you have to stop acting, but maybe what it means is you post YouTube videos of yourself, or you collaborate with someone else, or you join an acting group, but you go get a job that pays the rent. So you may have to structure your life differently than you thought. Again, a changed blueprint.
That's a very wise advice. You know what I always think is that if you are in the arts, not, we're not generalizing here, but for the most part, I think getting a sales job works because hours are a little flexible. If you're at that point where you're like, do I choose the arts or do I choose this? Because when you have the arts in your heart, you have no escape. Whether you collaborate, whether you do it online, where it's just within you and you can't get rid of it. So you have to do something that will actually spark that happiness within you. So if you want to continue doing it and one of you guys is in this transition or in this situation, I think that sales is a really, really good career to choose because you're still talking to people, you're still using the skills that you maybe acquired through the arts and make a little bit of money and continue following your path, the path that you chose, your dreams, whatever, but never give up, which is very important.
Right.
Whenever you are, because you're dealing with people in difficult situations, how are you able to detach from it, from, all the situations and live your personal life outside of your area of work?
Well, that's a really good question. It really is. I learned to detach when I was a crisis counselor. I had clients that were attempting suicide, and that was really, really hard. There was training involved before I did it, but I found that was extremely draining. And compared to that, the clients I work with now, not a problem.
Walk
Life,
in the park.
yeah, exactly. Walk in the park compared to dealing with people that are contemplating suicide or are in abusive situations or some really terrible life story, have a really terrible life story. So I know that as a coach, it's not about me. I don't have a personal investment. I'm there to listen. I'm there to help that person work through their own issues and help them get themselves to where they need to be. So because it's about them and not me, it doesn't zap my own internal strength and life. I still have my life. It's that when I'm working with them, I'm working with them for their own good about their issues. So it isn't as murky or blurry.
Yeah. And do you remember the first time when you did have this crisis coaching situation? Do you remember that time, the first time you did one person, like your first attempt or your first, not client, but what do you call them?
Yeah, you could say client. Could say client.
Your
Yeah,
first client.
it was fine. My heart was beating. Like I could hardly breathe. I was so scared. And the protocol was to get a supervisor involved, and then they send emergency personnel and responders out to the location. But I had to elicit enough information from the client to be able to ascertain where those emergency responders had to go. So it was really hard. It was really scary. And
Yeah.
it worked out okay, but and it got easier as I did it a little bit more, but never easy.
Did you have to role play as part of training?
Not so much. There wasn't really role play in that particular type of training.
Hmm. Okay, it's crazy because it's like you're going from one um being someone that's handling different situations into handling a crisis like that. It must have been terrifying. But that speaks of your strength as a person, as a woman.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
I'd like
absolutely.
to think I was helpful.
Yeah. What is your dream?
My dream. That's hard to answer. It's a great question, but it's hard to answer because many dreams. I don't just have one. I think
For
maybe when you're a lot younger, the idea of a dream makes sense. But now I would say I have dreams in so many different areas that it's more complicated.
in your professional life, what would be your goal right now? Your long-term goal, maybe.
Well, I would like to grow my one on one coaching business. I would also like to maintain my one to many role via podcasts and writing, which I find very
Hmm.
satisfying. Um, I would like to have more in person clients because I do think face to face is really my preferred method, but I am happy doing Zoom as well. I would also like to expand it a little bit globally. Friend in France a few years ago, she was saying what a great need there is. And I haven't pursued how to do that in France, but if I was talking about on a dream level, that would be something that would be very interesting.
Definitely. Absolutely. What do you think is a challenge when it comes to one of the biggest challenges when it comes to building a business from scratch? You did everything else and then you started this life coaching. So what was or what is continues to be a challenge when it comes to your business? Is it advertisement? Is it what is the biggest thing?
Getting yourself out there. I am an introvert. I do not like to do that, getting yourself out there, promoting yourself. I do not embrace social media. It's sort of a love hate thing. Really don't like to have to tell people about me. So thank you for having me on as a guest.
Yeah, no, for
I
sure.
would love it if I never had to do any self promotion. You have to establish your brand. People have to know who you are before they pay any attention to what you're saying. I just find that part so challenging. And I think a lot of business owners do because really we'd rather be putting our attention on what we do for our business, not how we get business.
Yeah. I think it has probably a 15-25% to do with the fact that you're an artist too. It's like, like you can do your art and feel like it's someone's gonna find it. It's just gonna get out there, on its own and not have to really put it out there and like have to push people to get it, see it, buy it, acquire it, whatever it is, whatever it may be. But the good thing is that technology can push all of your product out there, everything that you're doing, because you continue to work so hard and do so many things. You need to show it to the world.
True.
You have to show it to the world.
I
And
find it,
how do you solve your own transitions nowadays? Do you have a life coach yourself?
I do not, but I think about, okay, what if I were a client and I
Mm,
was coaching myself? And that is very helpful because then I can step back and say, okay, let's look at this. What are you grappling with? How are you getting in your own way? What are the deeper issues here? And I'm usually pretty honest with myself. And that I find that is very helpful. And a
good
lot of
for you.
it, I've internalized a lot, I'm sure, from working with my own life coach years back. So basically, I treat myself as I would a client.
I love it. Do you get a lot of support? Did you get a lot of support when you started this from your husband?
Yes. I mean, he's he was more like, yeah, go ahead, that's fine. The support I got the most support from the other people I met in the program. All people
Mm,
trying to do the same thing I'm doing. And we have all been very supportive of each other. And that has
yeah,
been the greatest source of support. Thankfully, my husband wasn't against it. That would have been difficult.
yeah. Do you continue to keep each other accountable and support each other? The people that
We do.
that's amazing
In
because
fact,
it's the only way to.
I have a Zoom with a friend in Manchester, England, and a friend in Vancouver, Canada.
I love it. I love it. You know what? Going back to the fact that I'm Peruvian and generalizing in Latin America in general, I think it would be so powerful. It's so useful to promote life transition coaches a little bit more because just like in any place of the world, we're all going through transitions and they're difficult.
Hmm.
However, different cultures experience different issues, but we're human, so we're all
Right.
evolving, transitioning into different things. And I love that. So, talking about transition, tell me what it is, what are the things that you had to quit to become the you nowadays, the one that owns her business, the one that's here in this podcast with me, even though she is not 100% for it, and the one that continues to create because you have that store and you have different things. So, what have you had to quit?
That's $1 million question. I would say the biggest thing I had to quit was what I mentioned earlier when I got laid off in 2019. I had to quit the idea that I was going to have a full time career with full time salary and benefits. I had to let go of that role. I had always seen myself in that role. I had to reinvent myself, as it were, and say, okay, this is not working. And it's, if you're really honest with yourself, it's not making you happy. It's making you feel like you have to prove yourself every single day.
Mm,
And that is something that I struggled with for decades. And that was perhaps self imposed, but I'm sure I was getting messages from everybody around me in some fashion or other. I had to allow myself to let go of that and say, look, you excelled in your workplace in some areas. You didn't in others for sure, but you did in the areas that you cared most about, that you're best at. So take that and do something with it. And that's how I mentioned that I recognized that the part of my jobs that I'd like the best was being the liaison between different people. It wasn't creating schedules, being a project manager, I'll tell you that. But it was getting people in a room together and getting them to break down the issues and discuss them and make some progress and have some actionable steps and then have holding them accountable. And all of those skills transfer very easily into becoming a life transition coach.
I love it. That was because you've had so much experience in such different areas. It's nice to see how a life transition coach was able to help you transition into this business, which is, you helping others to have that same transition. How do you deal with transitions when it comes to your children?
Oh, how much time do you have?
That's true.
Fortunately, I love being a mother, and
Uh,
I have raised two very successful, but I don't necessarily only mean financial successful. One is more successful financially than the other, but they're both very successful human beings. They are self-reliant, self-sufficient, they're giving, they're wonderful. And the transitions have been they've been each of my sons are very different from each other. um, my younger son has gone through a lot of transitions. My older son a, is experiencing the transition of new parenthood. He they're their daughter turned a year this week. But the first
Congrats.
3 months, thank you. The first 3 months, wow, they went through what all new parents go through, what that I went through with him. The transition between being pregnant, oh, I'm having a baby, to, oh my God, I have this baby 24/7.
How do I turn it off?
Happened to my life. It's a
Yeah.
huge transition. And that transition never really ends because, yes, you get through the first 3 months, and then pretty soon they're toddlers and they're elementary school and they're high school and they're college and they've got careers and so on. And then they get married and they have their own kids. It never ends. It's one long transition. Some points of that are more challenging than others, such as when my son became a new father.
Yeah.
But it's one big transition, really.
So I can't let you go before asking you this, Ellen, because you have a marriage, and I see this so often. How do you deal with marriage transitions? Because what I've been seeing is that a couple of years go by, and as we evolve as people, both parties change.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to readjust and go through that space where I've seen that maybe after 10 years or so, there's that thought of, are you really that person that I want to continue sharing my life with? Or maybe it's a little more down the road or whatever. But at a certain point, most of the time, there's that question, are you the one, or should I go on Instagram and look for someone else? You know? Because now we have that non-real option, which is, you can, it seems as if you have so many options, but that's not the case really. But technology has changed everything. So it's a little bit harder. Before it was like a forever thing. We get married, we get through it till the end of our days. But now it's varied. So what do you suggest for people that are going through this transition with their marriages?
Well, first of all, I won't purport to give marital advice to everybody. Everybody's situation is different, and I don't want to be misinterpreted or I, I everybody's different.
Absolutely.
I'd say one thing that's important is don't put all your eggs in that basket. Make sure you've got support and relationships outside of your marriage, family, friends. Make sure you're not just in it and expecting that person to satisfy and fulfill you in every single way. It's not realistic. Recognize
Mm.
areas that work. Try to find commonality and what you care about together. Build a life together. But it's not going to be perfect. It's not. There's going to be areas that you just are different. And so cut some slack. Don't expect that other person to fulfill every single one of your needs. That's sort of
Mm.
a very brief, encapsulated version.
I love it. I love it. And also because you're supposed to kind of like build your life and that other person build his life, but also have a certain point where you come together. But like you said, have your friendships, have your dreams, goals, aspirations, and be happy, a happy human being, so that when you both come together, you're
Right.
both happy, rather
Right.
than trying to figure out how do we make each other happy if we're not
Right.
happy with ourselves.
Exactly. Nobody's
Thank
going
you
to make
so
you happy.
much. I love it. Ellen, how can people find you?
I would love it if people would go to my website, which is Ellen, Ellen Rothstein, ROTHSTEIN.com. But really, just email me. It's Ellen at EllenRothstein.com. I would be open to responding via email. That's really the best way. I am on LinkedIn. Um, I'm not so much anywhere else these days. I've sort of minimized the other social media presence. But yes, please, email would be my first choice. And there is a contact form on my website as well.
Wonderful. You've given us so much information that I think you should be more out there, because
Thank you.
the world needs to hear a little bit more from you.
Well,
But
thank you so much.
absolutely. But either way, I thank you so very much for being here with us. It's been wonderful having you. and I can't wait to hear from everything else that you continue doing.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. I've really thoroughly enjoyed being on your podcast.
Definitely. And thank you guys for watching and listening this other episode. I am Sara Nunez, your host, and we'll see you on the next one.